بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. And welcome to Fiqh al-Mu'amalat online course. And today we shall carry on the discussions of Muarabaha. We cover first in these sessions the component of Muarabaha, and we start with the contracting party. Of course, contracting party, Muarabaha, is a contract, and typically a contract has a pillar of contract, as we have discussed it early on in the pillars of the contract. We have the two contracting party, the buyer and the sellers, and we have the offer and acceptance, or a sira, offer and acceptance, and we have the subject matter, or mawdu' al-aqd, which is the assets and the price. So let's start with the contracting party, which are the buyer and the seller. So the point number one, the contracting party in Muarabaha contract shall be sellers and purchasers. Again, the structure of Muarabaha is there a buyer and sellers, and why? Because typically we are talking about bay'a, and in a bay'a we have al-bay'a and al-mushtari, the sellers and the purchaser. So that's number one, because we are not in a leasing, so we don't talk about lessor and leasing, but we talk about a buyer and the seller, because it is a bay'a, it is a sales contract, it is trade-based contract. And that's why sometimes when you speak to a conventional bankers mindset, sometimes they don't digest the concept when you say the bank is selling to the customers, because the terminology of buying and selling is not strongly present in the conventional banking, because they just do provide loans and charge interest on that. But as we discussed early on in these sessions, especially when we talk about the Islamic financial intermediations, that the all transactions, trade, whatever happens in the market in a form of trade is happening in the banking, but in the concept of what's so-called financial intermediation, meaning buying and selling, leasing, partnership, and so on and so forth. It's happening in the banking, similar to the traditional market, but only under the structure of financial intermediations, until some strict regulations and requirements and guidelines under the central bank. So the second point is that the contracting party will have the legal capacity to enter into the Muarabaha contract. So you have to make sure that the contracting party have the competency requirements, for example, 18 years for the individuals, and the company if it is artificial entity. So some legal documentations required by the financial institutions, and some forms, just to make sure that this legal entity does exist and comply with the law of the country. For individuals, definitely it is the competency, and we talk about the requirement of the competency for male and females. We talk about the what's called puberty. We talk about sound minds, maturity. I think all this information we have talked about it in the early introduction. But the bottom line is that competency requirements should be what's so-called approved before concluding the contract. And a normal one in the practice is the age. Each country has a specific age to determine the age of competency. So if you have that specific age, you are competent to proceed with the transactions if there is no obstacle for that. The other point is that the contracting party in Muarabaha contract may be a natural person or a legal person. So again, you could be individuals, like a person. You go and walk to the bank, and could be a legal person or artificial entity, like for example a corporation. That one is also acceptable. The other point is that a party to Muarabaha contract may enter into a contract through an agent. Meaning that contracting, the Muarabaha could be done directly or could be indirectly, meaning that you can go through a buyer and a seller, or go through agency. So sometimes the bank may appoint agents to conclude the contract on your behalf, and the clients could appoint the agent to conclude the contract on his behalf. And as you know, agency contract is a valid contract that gives you eligibility to transact on behalf of the principal within the mandate and the authority and the scope of the agency agreement. So this one is also applicable in Wakala, applicable in Murabaha, and we'll see in the future how strongly Wakala is incorporated in the transactions of Murabaha. The other point is that the Murabaha contract shall be entered into through an offer and acceptance between the contracting party, which means that in order for you to conclude the contract, it is through offer and acceptance, which is the sira that we have discussed it before, meaning that how to contract Murabaha. And Murabaha is a bay'a through ijab and qabul, meaning through sira, meaning through offer and acceptance, which is the communications between the bank and the what's so-called client on the Murabaha. And normally in practice, this one will take in a form of verbal communication by the phone, sometimes through social media, sometimes through internet, sometimes through meetings. So now we have a Zoom meeting, we have team meeting, we have WebEx, we have different platform, Blue Jeans. All these are platform for communications and meeting that could be deployed in concluding the contract. Sometimes e-signatures, sometimes this you send you the documents, you go, then you sign electronically, then this one will be accepted and could be formalized later on. But all these are means, and as we discussed it, often accepted could be done traditionally by signing the documents and could be through different means and ways as has been practiced and validated by the market. But definitely it is the offer and acceptance, because offer and acceptance or definition of a contract itself or sales, it's communications of the offer and acceptance, where the offer and acceptance are connected. So basically the contract is concluded and each mark its effect on the subject matter, whereby price goes to the sellers and the subject goes to the buyer, and this is applicable to Murabaha as well. The other point is that the offer and acceptance may be expressed by appropriate documentation. As we mentioned, you just present the documents when the customer walk in and sign, or by any other method accepted by customary business practice, meaning that market practice al-urfu tijari validate some kind of offer and acceptance, and it is a practice acknowledged by the market, acknowledged by the business practices, acknowledged by the court, and no issue to recognize it as a mode of conveying your consent and acceptance. If that one is accepted, so Sharia has no objection on that, because Sharia give a very strong recognition to the market practice as long as it does not violate the Sharia rules and principle. And nowadays, as you know, they will send you the sometimes the contract in PDF format, then you read it, and after that you will click, then either you get a signed picture, you upload it, or you just sign it, then automatically your signature will be captured and the document will be automatically signed by both parties. This is a different or new means that has been developed, especially with the current situations of the COVID-19, whereby distances become something mandatory, and most of the transactions become online and from distance. So that's the practice of the what's so-called offer and acceptance, e-signatures, and offer and acceptance from distance, more relevant, more applicable, and convenient to both parties, and Sharia has no issue on that. Which do not contravene a Sharia principle, meaning the customary business practice which does not contravene any Sharia requirement, as long it is in line with the Sharia general rules. Sharia has no objections to validate this kind of offer and acceptance if this is the practice of the market. The other point, or the last point in this component, is that any terms and conditions mutually agree upon which does not contravene the Sharia shall be binding on the contracting party. Here, the Sharia opens space for what's called a shurut al-jaliyah, because shurut is divided, or conditions are divided into two Sharia conditions, which is a shurut al-shara'iyah, and basically the stipulated condition or shurut jaliya. So stipulated conditions are conditions which are imposed, invented, requested by the customers, and it is not a Sharia requirement. Meaning Sharia did not impose this condition, but it has been created, has been added, has been stipulated by the customers. And the customers, they have the right, I mean the clients, the contracting party, they have the right, buyers and sellers. Being a buyer or seller, it doesn't matter. What is matter is that the two contracting parties, they will look after their interests and see what are the conditions that should be there to protect my interest. And they will negotiate, and if both parties, sellers will add, the buyers will add, sellers will add, then at the end of the day we'll come with an agreement which has two types of conditions. Sharia conditions, what you cannot compromise on it, you have to comply with it and add it. In addition to that, there are stipulated contracts whereby the contracting party may add additional conditions to manage their risk, to manage their interests, as long it does not contradict Sharia rules and requirements. And as Al-Hadith al-Sharif, the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Muslimuna ala shurutihim. So the Muslims are bound by their terms and conditions, will be bound by your terms and conditions as long as the conditions that you have provided does not violate Sharia ruling, does not make the non-permissible permissible, and doesn't make the permissible non-permissible. As long as you are away from this, so basically you have the right to add term and conditions. And if you look at the existing documentations in Islamic banking, basically most of it, I may say, more of it from my humble experience, most of the terms and conditions are not Sharia conditions. Sharia conditions, you may summarize it maybe, I don't know, maybe in 1 or 2 pages, but you may see, I don't know, over 20 pages sometimes 70 pages, sometimes even 100 pages. Most of the conditions are stipulated conditions by the contracting party to manage their risk. Of course, this one, it depends how complex is the transactions, how complex is the deal, how big is the deal, and what kind of product we are talking about. Like for example, if you talk about sukuk, typically you have a lot of contracts, especially if you talk about ijara, you may end up into 14 types of contract and agreements. And it goes like this. So it depends on the contract, products, how it is complex, how simple it is, how complex it is. But in overall, you will see most of the terms and the conditions are stipulated conditions imposed by the contracting party and not imposed by Sharia. And in the Sharia, we will see some conditions here and there because in the muamalat, you don't see very strict requirements. Yeah, maybe in al-muamalat, you know, how to pray, how to do fasting, how to do the hajj, you will see very strict sequence and step and guidance how to make every move, because you are worshiping God. Meaning even you pray, how to pray, what you will say, you know, what you do, how your exercise, what you should wear, what you know should wear. All this information, details, basically is governing your actions in details to make sure that you are praying God in a correct manner. But when it comes to transactions, basically you transact in the way you like. So there are very simple and a minimum requirements to validate a specific Sharia contract, but the bulk of the documentation is basically additional and stipulated contract, sometimes conditions imposed by the contracting party, sometimes conditions which are practiced by the market, sometimes conditions related to the guidelines of the central bank, conditions related to the regulations by the Security Commission, sometimes contract related by the law of that specific sections, partnership or leasing, sometimes money laundering, sometimes data protections. It depends. You will see lots of things. In order to capture the entire contract, you will see a very long sequence of terms and conditions that reflect the different angles of legals, aspect, requirements, and guidelines. And you will see that the Sharia part is very small. But anyway, this is just an observation. But what is important here is that Sharia allowed the contracting party to add and stipulate additional contracting as long as does not violate the existing Sharia that you are engaging in. At the same time, doesn't violate the Sharia rules and principles. With that, thank you very much, and see you inshallah in the coming session. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.